In Season 2 of The Walking Dead, Rick, Herschel and Glenn are in this bar. And whilst they are chatting and trying to get Herschel to come back to the farm, these two men enter the bar. Their names are Dave and Tony. Now eventually, of course, Rick executes both men, in self-defense, I would say. And following this, there's a shootout with the members of Dave and Tony's group and Rick and his allies. Now in this shootout, Herschel ends up killing a member of the group named Sean, and of course Randall, another member of the group, jumps off a rooftop and has his leg impaled. The other member that we see, a man named Nate, simply drives off and flees when the walkers approach the groups of men. This group is of course called The Living. The name of the group is actually revealed in the Walking Dead Facebook social game, but we'll get onto that in a moment. Now, the only member that we really get to know is of course Randall, who's kept captive in the barn for a bit until eventually he's killed by Shane. Through the interrogation of Randall, done by Daryl, we learn that this group of men were not particularly nice. Randall claims he wasn't really one of them, but Randall tells Daryl that at one point the group of men basically attacked this family farm. They assaulted the daughters of the farm whilst the father, the patriarch, watched. So, horrible men, horrible. Now, the name for the group, The Living, actually comes from the Walking Dead social game, which was a Facebook game that ran for a few years during like season 2 to 4, I think. It's no longer active. But in the game, we learned the leader of The Living is a man named Harlan. We also learn a little bit more about Randall, Dave, Tony, and Sean. Sean, of course, having a brother called Willie. And also another member of The Living named Don. Interestingly, within the game, Don, one of the members of The Living, is actually killed by soldiers of Woodbury. There's a little bit of a crossroads here with Season 2 and 3, which is kind of cool. But the social game is not considered canon in any way, shape, or form, so cut it off, forget about it. However, we do learn more about The Living from another source. You'll never guess which source it is. Oh my god, it's the Walking Dead role-playing game. Yeah, that's right, I'm still talking about the RPG, okay? I'm still in love with this damn game. Now, I talked about the Atlanta campaign setup in my Cindy video, but basically, within the RPG is this like pre-generated campaign that you can just play right off the bat. And within that, you can, of course, find Cindy, who's all sick on these boats. Go watch that other video if you haven't already. But we also learn about The Living. So there are these things in the RPG called factions. These are basically other groups that can be hostile, or you can trade with, or you can join, or you can implement in some way. But the faction of The Living is not a nice faction at all. Because, of course, we know who these guys are. They are some horrible plunderers. Not nice to women. Yeah, not great guys. Now bear in mind, this campaign is said to be set after the events of Season 11, which would mean The Living is like one of the most long-lasting groups of survivors in the Walking Dead universe, because these guys have been around since Season bloody 2, and they're still going post-Season 11. That's kind of crazy. Anyway, within the RPG, The Living are described as a group of about 50 people living in a bombed-out factory. They scavenge the area, they steal from strangers, they're very disorganized, very violent, and whoever is the strongest in the group makes the decisions. Now, Nate Miller, the guy who, of course, is in the truck and drives away, is described as being the leader of The Living. He's a manipulative, unpredictable person who loves this new world. Any disputes that The Living have are settled in a place called the Hull, which is basically this fighting pit surrounded by chained walkers. The combatants will either fight to the death or wait until one of them, of course, surrenders. Anyone who's too weak to fight is basically forced to do labour for the group, and they are sent out scavenging and taking care of the greenhouse and things like that. The Living also have this radio transmitter which they use to send out messages, claiming that their haven is a thriving sanctuary. When survivors arrive, they are either killed or they are enslaved. The Living are well armed, but they are desperately short on ammunition, and they mostly fight with spears, baseball bats, and Molotov cocktails. The faction members within the haven as well, they all live in like small groups all over the factory. They kind of hide from each other. They don't really trust each other. And of course, they won't trust intruders either. So there's clearly like this group is like rippled. It's on the brink of collapse. Now, you may have just noticed that I used a lot of pictures from the television show to represent the different components of the Living space. And that's because it honestly feels like the Living is now just a massive melting pot of all the villain groups in the Walking Dead main television show universe. I mean, there's got aspects of Woodbury, aspects of Terminus, aspects of the Sanctuary. It's kind of crazy. There's a few other members that we learn about too. A guy called Robert Lehman, who's a surgeon, and Chloe Barnes, who's the person in charge of the radio transmitter. I want to discuss like what can happen to Nate and the Living, but first I just need to talk about the other two factions within the campaign. The first is a faction called the Reborn. These are basically like a kooky religious group, and the other is a faction called the School, right? This is a bunch of former students and stuff who live within this school. So one of the possible endgames for the Living is that the School starts trading with the Living, giving them ammunition that they of course need, but then the Living will just turn on the School, attack them, burn it to the ground, and begin to take prisoners. Basically, this will mean that the Living ends the campaign as like a really, really powerful faction. The other option is that the Reborn grows in size and challenges the Living and the School. More and more believers are then drawn to the faith, and then the leader of the Reborn murders Nate Miller. This then gives the Reborn power over the Living, and they use it to attack and defeat the School. So basically then, in this scenario, the Reborn becomes like the huge faction, and the Living is pretty much wiped out, or integrated within the Reborn. Now, like I discussed in the Cindy video, it's possible to not consider the events of this canon, but the events leading up to it as canon. So basically, it is true that the Living eventually do grow to a large group and do control an area of Georgia, a fairly large area, but what happens beyond that is obviously non-canon. Basically, everything that happens in this campaign just before it starts is all still canon within the Walking Dead universe. So I like to think that, yeah, the Living and Nate do survive for a long time, and they do continue to plunder and raid and murder people for their own gain, and they have survived that lifestyle so far. And what happens to them next is, to be determined, I suppose. I just love how this RPG and this campaign focuses on such a insignificant group of survivors. Not to say that Dave and Tony weren't significant, but their sort of group wasn't. We never really see them again after, I guess, the death of Randall. So yeah, it is kind of wild that they've expanded on these people, and especially like Nate. The fact that they've confirmed Nate's surname, but we still don't know what Aaron's surname is wild to me. Absolutely wild, but hey ho, that's how it goes. Maybe I need to set up like a Discord or something, because I really want to play like this campaign, or even make my own campaigns and do so. If you guys are interested in that, if you guys are willing to actually play it as well, because it would have to be in like voice chat, let me know, because that would be something I would be really interested in setting up. Obviously, you'd have to be serious about it though, because it does take a little bit of commitment, of course. There you go. That's the fate of the Living explained. What happened to Dave and Tony's group? I thought this was pretty cool. Let me know. I'm really enjoying digging into the lore hidden within the role-playing game. This is something I've just been obsessed with recently. It will pass, don't worry. But if you'd like to see more videos on the RPG and some more lore, let me know. We could do one on the Wolves. We could do one on Grady Memorial. We could just do one on the RPG in general, right? And talk about like some cool things, like hidden details or something that you can be found within the RPG. That could be interesting. So let me know. And I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Good Bizzle.